Hello, good. Welcome to Microsoft Community Insights podcast, where we share insights from community experts to stay up to date with Azure. My name is Nicholas, and I'll be your host today. In this podcast, we will dive into data platform. But before we get started, I would just want you to remind you to follow us on social media so you don't miss an episode. To help us reach more amazing people like yourself. In this Today in this podcast, we have a special guest called Michael Tobin. Sorry if I pronounced it wrong. Can you start by introducing yourself, please?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Michael Tobin. I'm a Azure consultant at ANS, so I'm primarily responsible for the delivery of infrastructure on Azure, pretty much all things infrastructure. So that's landing zones, infrastructure, PaaS services, migrations, and data platform specifically as well. So what we're going to be talking about today a little bit.
Okay, brilliant. So, before we get started, to those who don't know what data platform, can you briefly explain what it is?
Yeah, of course. So a data platform is essentially a set of technologies. It's not specific to Azure or anything like that. You could have a data platform in AWS, you could
Yeah.
have one in GCP, but it's a set of technologies that are designed to manage, process, store, and analyze large volumes of data. That data could be structured, it could be semi-structured, it could be unstructured, and it's to really get sort of analytics based on your data set that you're ingesting into a platform.
Okay, so how does that differ from traditional database?
Yes, so the kind of difference with a platform end to end is a database might be a source for your data platform, and then you want to basically take that data. You want to do a process which is called ETL, so that stands for extract, transform, and load. And sometimes your data, if it's raw or unstructured, it might not be useful to report on. So you might not be able to get the analytics you want out of them. So with ETL, that sort of involves obviously the process extract, which is taking your data from source systems, putting them into a staging area for your data platform. Transformation, that's running sort of logic and business rules against the data. That could be like SQL queries. It could be things that ensure the data is in the correct structure because there might be issues with the data you're ingesting. And then loading, which is where you move that transformed data into a target repository. That could be, if you're looking at something like a data lake, that could be the next layer in your data lake, for example.
Okay, brilliant. So in your experience, what are the key components you see that's need required in data platforms?
Yeah, absolutely. So your key areas are an ingestion. So you need some kind of ingestion. Typically, that's using what's called an Azure integration runtime or a self-hosted integration runtime. So
Yeah.
that allows you to essentially pull your data either from Azure or an on-premise source. It doesn't have to be on-premise. It could also be other cloud providers with a self-hosted integrated runtime. Another component is you need storage. So in Azure, that's blob storage. It's something called Azure Data Lake, Azure Data Lake Gen 2. And that's essentially large data storage that's based on blob storage and allows you to containerize data into sort of different layers. Now, there's different concepts around that. Generally, day to day, I see the medallion architecture, which is a Databricks model, where you've got the kind of bronze, silver, and gold, three containers in a blob storage container typically, which is bronze is your raw data ingestion, silver is your kind of first level of ETL, so you've filtered, cleaned, and augmented the data, and then gold is where you've got kind of business level reporting.
Okay. So, before when you introduced yourself, you said you worked on some landing zones. So, what's the difference between a typical landing zone and a data platform landing zone?
Yeah, so generally, what we do is that there are some data landing zone architectures, but we recommend having a
Yeah.
landing zone in place before you sort of look to do a data platform. It's really
Yeah.
important for, especially when you're ingesting data from on-premise, it's really important you've got your hybrid connectivity set up, your private DNS is set up correctly, whether that's Azure Private DNS Resolver or domain controllers. We strongly recommend having a landing zone, and some people, because there's a big focus on data at the minute, obviously with AI coming up, it's really important to have that data processed and it's sort of business level, we call it. So it's really important to have that. And some people come into kind of projects like this without a landing zone and say, oh, I just want a data platform. But it's really important to have that key landing zone deployment done in the first place. Not just for the hybrid connectivity element, but to have a good model of role-based access control and your firewall and things like that. So it is really important to have a landing zone in place when you sort of come to look at deploying a modern data platform and the elements of it.
Okay, brilliant. So how did you, for example, when you create the landing zone, do you just create it with infrastructure as code, right? Terraform and Bicep, and
Yeah.
then you just put all those data resources like data lakes and stuff in within the landing zone?
Yeah, so we typically do it. It's kind of there's not one size fits all, but what we generally
Yeah,
recommend is you have a dev, test, and prod environment, and we typically recommend separating them out into different subscriptions. So they will probably sit under the corp management group, and then you'd have a subscription per environment for your data platform. So it fits into the landing zone, but in terms of the resource deployment, we usually keep that separate to landing zones.
okay, brilliant. So security is quite very important for
Yeah,
data
definitely.
platform as well. So what are the best practice for securing data in Azure data platforms when you do create those?
Yeah, absolutely. So it kind of splits up to two parts for me, and obviously there's a lot more than just two parts, but at a very high level, networking security and your
Yeah,
role-based access control sort of strategy. So when it comes to networking security, pretty much all the resources that I see in a typical data platform can be connected up with private endpoint. So a
yeah,
storage account can have private endpoint. Generally, we see key vaults used in data platforms to obviously store things like connection strings to databases. Obviously, that can be secured with private endpoint. Azure Synapse has 4 different private endpoints attached to it. That's 3 for the back end and then 1 for the front end UI. So if you want, you can have that only accessed from your internal network, which obviously we strongly recommend because Synapse can be exposed to the internet, and it is possible to do. And if you have a good RBAC strategy and things like that, it's not too much of a worry. But generally, we recommend locking that down. Private endpoints are really the key here, and just making sure they're configured correctly and public access is turned off. Obviously, it comes in with policy as well and your governance strategies. So generally, we recommend having the policy in Azure on for denying public access to PaaS resources. That's a really important one here because a lot of data platforms are based on these PaaS resources. So, like again, storage account, Key Vault, Synapse, they're all PaaS resources, and they all have public enabled by default. So locking that down is really key. It's really important. The second thing is thinking about your kind of audience and who's going to use your data platform. So do you have data engineers? Do you have data architects? Kind of defining personas, and then making sure you build out a role-based access control strategy that sort of fits those different personas. So does a data engineer need access to a database, for example? Probably. Do they need access to Synapse, for example? Probably. Do they need access to a key vault? Probably not. They might not need to add credentials in, whereas an admin, an administrator might need to do that. So it's just about making sure the roles are defined and what everyone's doing and building out RBAC groups in Entra. And then, further on top of that, if you've got P2 licenses, integrating that with PIM, integrating that with access packages and things like that. So it's really important to have a good role-based access control strategy as well as your networking strategy.
yeah. Because I know that data platform involves like large amount of data, and I think it's very crucial that you secure your data, whether it's you need to have
Yeah,
auto
definitely.
scaling features of it to scale it up, scale it on demand or so, according to organization.
Yeah, so in terms of scaling, depending on kind of what tools you're using, you've got a lot of different options. So when it comes to Synapse, you've got dedicated SQL pools and you've got
Yeah,
serverless ones. So the serverless ones will scale. Your dedicated ones, you generally need to define the SKU yourself. When it comes to other tools like Databricks, you've got clusters and you can set a minimum and maximum amount of workers, which are just virtual machines essentially, and you can define the SKU as well. So things like ETL processes, like I mentioned at the start, that sometimes some smaller ETL processes probably don't need too much compute, and obviously with clusters and things like that, it allows you to the sort of serverless options are probably the best way to go in terms of cost saving. Databricks have just brought in serverless compute into public preview in Azure. That's getting rolled out pretty soon. So that'll it'll really help. It'll probably save a lot of costs when it comes to
Yeah. So
scaling
for
that.
those who don't know what's ETL, do you want to explain what it is for the viewers?
Yeah, of course. So I did touch on it briefly before, but it's essentially a process which stands for extract, transform, and load. And extract is pulling data from a source system, so that could be ingesting tables in a database into a storage account. The transformation process is usually kind of defined by data engineers, and they'll typically work with different use cases to shape that data in a certain way. So
Yeah.
it could be doing things like validation. So something, an example I got could be that, you could pull in a table which has loads of people's postcodes in, but someone might have put two spaces in the postcode, which gives incorrect data. So it's taking data like that and just making sure it's in kind of a fit shape. And then load is taking that data that's been cleaned up and then storing it somewhere else essentially. So that could be a data warehouse, it could be a data mart, it could be a different type of storage system. Again, usually what we see is it comes into the storage account in a container, it then moves to a different container, and then a third time after the sort of last level of ETL moves into another container. So 3 containers in the storage account: bronze, silver, and gold. And then as it goes through that ETL process each time, it kind of progresses up into from bronze to silver to gold.
Yeah, because I know where I work, we currently use Purview, but could you use Purview in data platform as
Yeah,
well?
so Purview and data platforms go hand in hand. So there's connections from Purview to things like Synapse. There's connections to Purview to data storage as well. Obviously, it's a massive thing these days, and what I see used the most for when it comes to Purview is the data classification feature. So you're classifying the data that's been ingested into the platform. Obviously, Purview is a massive product, and it obviously encompasses a lot of other things. You've got the data loss protection and things like that. But yeah, we see a lot of Purview deployments go sort of hand in hand, and you can also hook Purview up to your source systems that are on premise. So it's not just
Mm.
limited to Azure. So that's really handy. So I just touched on
Yeah.
it briefly earlier, but you've got these virtual machines that are called self-hosted integrated runtimes. And when it comes to Data Factory and Synapse, their sort of function is to pull data into your platform. Now, Purview has self-hosted integrated runtimes as well, but they have a slightly different job. Rather than pulling data in, they're used to scan on-premise data, so you can categorize your on-premise data as well. So we do kind of see those go hand in hand with data platforms, and that's becoming really useful for organizations who need to categorize their on-premise databases
Yeah.
and source systems as well.
Yeah, because and also when you categorize uh your resource or database, always use labels in Purview because
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
they're very helpful. Okay,
Yeah.
so what's the best way to monitor a data platform for like performance wise?
Yeah, so with them being PaaS services, they are pretty scalable, but there's a lot of monitoring you can do, and especially with things like Databricks, there's a lot of logs you can ingest into log analytics workspaces, which we generally recommend centrally managing through put it like having a single log analytics workspace in your landing zone, and then trying to ingest your data in there. Generally, we see logs like pipeline triggers, who's running pipelines, have they been triggered automatically? That can be really useful to kind of monitor who's kicking off what pipelines. Is there anyone manually kicking off ETL pipelines or processes? Like I said, in terms of scalability, there isn't too much you need to do because a lot of these are based on PaaS resources. But yeah, when it comes to monitoring, definitely recommend having a good sort of log analytics strategy, making sure you're pulling in the right audit logs, especially from a security perspective as well, making sure your users have the right access and things like that.
That's brilliant. How can someone like someone new learn about data platform? Is it to any other resource that you recommend?
Yeah, so Microsoft Learn have some really good things on the data fundamentals course. I talk a little bit about data platforms on my blog as well. That's mtobin.uk. But there's some really good resources out there, and I think it's just worth noting that it's not limited to Azure. Obviously, there's loads of tools out there. There's Amazon Redshift is the AWS equivalent of Synapse on Azure, and there's also there's a lot of tools out there. I think that's probably the hardest thing about learning about data platforms is trying to sort of narrow the sort of tool set that you use, especially with so many products out there. There's a lot of SaaS products out there now as well, like Snowflake, which is a warehousing and database sort of rolled into one SaaS product. So yeah, there's a lot of good resources out there. Definitely MS Learn, especially around Synapse and Azure Data Factory. They're sort of the two most common products we see used. So it's worth noting it's not a one size fits all, but the sort of common architectures I see are a data lake and Synapse. That's kind of and obviously Key Vault as well. They're kind of the three core sort of parts of a data platform. But then you've also got data lake, data factory, and Databricks, for example. Now the sort of key difference between Synapse and data factories is that Data Factory is more of an orchestration tool, so it doesn't do ETL processes like Synapse does. It doesn't have the analytics part, but it does do orchestration, so essentially data movement. So you can use it to pull your data in from on-premise, and you can use it to, push your data into something like Databricks or push it into a different sort of system. So there's some sort of key differences there that are definitely worth looking into.
Okay, that's brilliant. So as this episode is almost coming to an end, we would love to hear about the individual yourself. So are you going to any events, like whether it's technical events, tech events, or like internal events in the future?
So hoping to go to the next Yorkshire Azure user group. I think that's coming up next month now. I went to the last one in Sheffield, and that was really good. I sort of like to try and get to them as much as possible. The Azure user groups are really good. At ANS, we have an internal event called TechCom every year, which is where we do talks from everyone sort of across the business, and that's really useful to learn about what everyone's doing across the business. But yeah, that's pretty much it from me. What about you, Nicholas? Any events coming up for you?
Yeah, so I'll give myself a little plug. So
Yeah, go on.
there is so I'm part of the organizer for Expert Live UK, and it's coming to London. We're gonna start a user group, so it's coming to London next month on the 20th. So if you're free, you can welcome to join.
Yeah, that'd be good. I'll hope to get down there.
Yeah, so it's just that one, and maybe I'm going to Netherlands for the Expert Live Netherlands.
Oh wow.
It's quite a big one because it's
Yeah,
got
that's a big one. Yeah.
4,000 employee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the Netherlands one. It's quite a big group.
Yeah. So how can someone get in touch with you for any question regarding data platforms?
Yeah,
based on this
absolutely. So
episode?
I'm available primarily on LinkedIn, just Michael Tobin. That's MICHAELTOBIN. And then I've got my blog as well. That's just hosted on mtobin.uk. So yeah, primarily LinkedIn's probably the best place to get in touch with me, and feel free to connect or reach out if you don't have me already.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you for joining this episode, Michael. Thank
Yeah,
you.
no worries.
Bye.
Thanks very much for having me. Bye.